Austen, this incredible romantic writer, a woman, okay, this time, who is often reminded as someone who just wrote about love stories or romance or marriage. But are we sure that Jane Austen and Jane Austen's novels were just about that? Or maybe there is so much more, okay, deep inside her novels. So, first of all, Jane Austen was a romantic writer. She was born in 1775 in Steventon, and she was a daughter of a rector of a local parish. So she received a very, very conventional education. She wrote about the conventions of her time, conventions that are developing now. And then, talking about the Victorian age, this convention will be the structure itself of society. Because we know that Victorian society is extremely strict, okay? It's based on a strict moral code, on a strict social pattern, on patriarchal family, on conventions, okay? So now these conventions are developing, and Jane Austen is talking to us about those conventions. This is why her genre is called novel of manners, okay? And they are a great explanation, a great way of displaying society of her time. So Jane Austen wrote 6 major novels. We all know them: Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma. We have Emma here with us today, and Mansfield Park, Persuasion. There is also another work, a novel. We don't often talk about that, but actually it's very, very particular. And this is the example and the proof that she didn't only write about marriage and about love stories. This is Northanger Abbey, talking about literature, basically. It's criticism towards literature, and in particular towards the Gothic currents. We know that in this period, so between the 18th and 19th century, the Gothic novel and the Gothic, we can say the Gothic currents in general, was very, very popular. We talked about Mary Shelley and her masterpiece, which is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, in one of my previous videos. And this Gothic currents, this Gothic attitude developed at the time to the point of becoming a little grotesque sometimes. Because, you know, when a genre, when a current is developing, but it always has to surprise the audience, well, sometimes there are also some excesses and some exaggerations. Some patterns that are repeated always the same then become stereotypes. So Jane Austen criticized that, she satirized, and actually her novel wasn't extremely appreciated at the time by other intellectuals and other writers, obviously, but we appreciate that now, because this is a very, very smart example of irony, of literature talking about literature in a very clever and smart way, because Jane Austen was extremely clever, actually. Also, as far as literary techniques are concerned, she was very modern. She wrote using an omniscient narrator in third person singular, and the narrator is anobtrusive. Anobtrusive means that the narrator doesn't explicitly give judgments, okay, but the opinion of the narrator is extremely clear, okay, is there to be read behind the lines. And her protagonists, her characters, are often described through dialogues. She uses dialogues a lot in order to display good and bad qualities of her characters. She also uses a quite new technique which is called free indirect speech. free indirect speech means that she always uses the third person singular narrator, but the thoughts, okay, and the way of thinking belongs sometimes to a first person singular narrator. The structure, okay, of the novel is always of a third person narrator, but at the same time we have sort of an indirect speech which is basically displaying the thoughts of the character himself. This is a mixture between first person and third person narrator. It's very, very interesting actually. So, we said before she used a lot of irony, was a very subtle irony, was very delicate, very elegant, and she also criticized her so-called small world. What does it mean, small world? Small world for Jane Austen was the word of her social class, the gentry. The gentry was the social class of new riches, we can say so. They were landowners, they were rich, they could buy the land, and sometimes they bought also the title, okay, together along with the land itself. And so they pretended to be noblemen, even if they weren't, and they tried to behave as aristocrats. But sometimes there were some excesses, some exaggerations. You know, when you try to pretend to be someone who you are not, you can often maybe find yourself exaggerating some aspects, and then something can become a little grotesque. And these are the aspects that Jane Austen criticized, but in a very gentle way, because she didn't want to attack her social class. She belonged there, she loved it, it was her world, everything she knew, okay, and so she really loved it. Still, she could anyway understand, okay, what was wrong or what could be criticized, and she was clever and smart enough to describe that and to use irony also to criticize that. Which aspects in particular? Well, she criticized often the lack of self-knowledge, of self-command, the lack of compassion, the selfishness of her class. She criticized also the vanity. We also have to remember that the word vain means empty also. And she criticized irresponsibilities most of the times. And so all these aspects, the lack of consideration for others, all these aspects are very strongly criticized, but always using that subtle irony, okay? She often, or she always she used to show her characters in action. So she didn't describe characters, she described the environment a lot, manners a lot, but characters are described by their own words and their own actions. This is also typical of the novel then in the 19th century. So this is Jane Austen. There is so much more there than just love stories. And also when we talk about marriage, we have to remember that marriage had a specific meaning, because marriage was the base, okay, for that element, which is patriarchal family, which is going to be the pillar, okay, of society from this moment on, especially then in Victorian society, okay? Patriarchal family, the strict moral code, the social pattern, they're all elements that will be incredibly important for Victorian age, and especially the middle class society that was developed during Victorian age. So even now these elements are starting to improve, to become more and more important, and marriage was a symbol, okay, was the main cell, okay, of patriarchal family, and this is why it was also an element of you can say the final aim in women's life. It was also very important for men, but for women it was really the only purpose in life. This is why her novels, Jane Austen novels, end, okay, when the marriage is prepared, or when there is the marriage, because the marriage is actually the final aim for every single woman. It's a sort of a task, okay, a duty, in order to be satisfied as a woman, but also in order to be part and to be useful and to be somehow accepted by this kind of society. So this is why marriage was so important, and the fact that Jane Austen died unmarried is also quite ironic somehow. So this is something about Jane Austen. There is so much more behind, so always try to read behind the lines. There are great witnesses of that kind of society, and always try to read the classics if you can, and not just okay, it's fine if you watch movies and it's beautiful, but classics, okay, reading classics will give you the depth of a world of interpretation. So thank you very much and see you soon. Bye.